Hey there, YouTube. Today I want to talk about a project that I was recently involved in, orchestrating the music for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I did this in partnership with my very good friend Tim Splain, who wrote the arrangements for the show. Now there's an Ask a Maestro element here too, because many people, including my friend Andre, aka Boudre, have asked me, what's the difference between composing, orchestrating, and arranging? So we'll get to that in a second, but first I'll tell you a little bit about my experiences orchestrating the music for this show. Now you might be thinking Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, that music has existed for over 50 years, and indeed it has, but in the past couple of years it's been performed as a live stage show. You have people who are dressed up as Rudolph and Hermie and Santa Claus. They sing the songs, they dance the dances, and it's basically a recreation of the original 1964 stop-motion TV special. So you might be thinking, well, wasn't that music in 1964 orchestrated by somebody already? Thank you so much for asking, indeed it was. But for the stage musical, many of the songs were expanded, dances were added to them, new verses, etc. were added to the songs. So there was a whole new set of orchestrations needed. Now this show played in Madison Square Garden for 3 weeks this December, so really this is the largest scale project that I've ever been involved in. And what's interesting about that is I really had no involvement outside of sitting here in my office and writing these orchestrations on my computer. After that, the materials went to the recording studio in Los Angeles where it was recorded, and since then it's been all over the country, but I've had nothing to do with it. So it was a little bit strange sitting there anonymously amongst literally thousands of people who were there enjoying my work, but who had no idea that I had anything to do with it. So after the show, my friend Tim and I went to a cafe to discuss this question of what's the difference between a composer, an arranger, and an orchestrator.
And the composer writes the songs. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was written by Johnny Marks. That's, as clear-cut as you get. The arranger, it's his or her task to decide how the song is used for the theatrical presentation. You choose the key, you choose where it's going to sound good in the voices, and for this show, there's a lot involved in the continuity from spoken language into sung language.
So, for example, you might add an introduction to the song.
Yes.
You might add a dance break into the song.
Right. On a piece like this, every song was about 1 minute and 15 seconds long.
Yeah.
In a theater presentation, that's not really going to be enough time for the song to kind of get off the ground. So I was asked to expand the songs generally to 2.5 to 3 minutes, or as long as 3.5 minutes.
Right. So you can mess with the tempo and the key and the style
tempo, feel,
and the feel.
And
right.
sometimes you'll add space between a line to create a little bit of dramatic tension.
And so then, what about the final components? Orchestration.
Orchestration is really the telling everyone what to do.
Right. So taking like music written for piano, for example, and expanding that so that everybody in the orchestra has something to play, and it all comes together and sounds.
And so you're adding more color, and for that you need someone who truly understands every component of the orchestra and what everyone's capabilities are, what everyone's strengths are. It's one thing to know that an oboe can play from here to here. It's another thing to know how an oboist breathes, what he'll be able to do well. If you have a trumpet player trying to play a violin line, even if it's all within the range, they just won't be able to execute it. You need someone to know how the mechanics of a trumpet speaks so that they'll be able to execute the parts on a first try.
So let's review. A composer writes from scratch the tunes that you could sing along to. My friend Tim then took those songs and did a number of things that qualify as arrangements. He worked with the singers to decide what keys those songs would be in. He decided if there were going to be any key changes during the song. One very common procedure to extend a Broadway show tune is to raise the key by a step in the middle of it. Point of order, that is not a modulation. A lot of times you hear people say, oh, well, we'll modulate it up a step. That is an unprepared key change. A modulation has to have a pivot chord and a whole thing. He decided which melodies would be played as underscore, which would be played as dance breaks. So then I come along and I take the music that has been arranged for piano or pianos or maybe a small ensemble, and I make it so that it can be played by a full studio orchestra in this case. So what I'm trying to do is create a certain sound world with the orchestra. There's a lot of different ways to write for orchestra. I could make it sound more classical, say, by leaning more heavily on strings and woodwinds. I could make it sound more jazzy and big band by leaning on the brass and the percussion. or I could make it sound more contemporary by leaning on, say, keyboards and electronic instruments. This show is so much about the nostalgia factor. So I wanted to write orchestrations that would be true to the originals, but would have an extra dollop of sweetness to kind of transport you back to your childhood when you heard them. So for example, one of the things that I did with these orchestrations was I tried to make them very string heavy, and I tried to make the string parts very lush. If you listen back to pop and Broadway and Hollywood music from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, you'll notice that the arrangers divided the strings up into several groups. So not just first violins, second violins, violas, but maybe up to say 10 different sections of strings, so that every note in the chord is played by some string player, and you're just suffusing the air with this kind of beautiful, lush string sound. Now, all of this raises the question, you have a composer, an arranger, and an orchestrator. In classical music, didn't one person just do all of those jobs? And the answer is yes. I mean, if you go to see an opera by Puccini or Verdi, they wrote all the music, they decided what keys it was going to be in, they orchestrated everything from top to bottom, they wrote all of the dance music themselves. They did it all. There are certain exceptions. For example, Rossini did not always write his recitatives. Then there are examples of works that were composed for piano, which other people later came along and decided that they wanted to have an orchestral version of it. For example, the Pictures at an Exhibition by Modest Mussorgsky, or another case with Mussorgsky is his Night on Bald Mountain, where he wrote an orchestration, but a lot of other people just thought that they could do it better than he did, so there exist a few other versions of it. Anyway, YouTube, that is a little primer on the difference between composing, arranging, and orchestrating, and a little bit about this very fun experience that I had orchestrating the songs for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, go sing a song, play an instrument, or orchestrate a score. And until then, goodbye everyone.